Hello again. This is Andy Vining, and welcome to episode 10 of My Mother's Diaries. We are now in May 1949, and the farm is in full bloom. As May arrived, the countryside around the farmhouse had fully awakened. The fields were green again, the garden was beginning to bloom, and the farmyard was alive with movement and noise. After the long winter months and the hesitant start to spring, May always seems to bring a new energy to everything. The month began quietly enough with tea at Joan Bucket's with the family in Allington Lane, Fair Oak. And that evening, Joan and Les called in the house to collect a few potatoes, and before long the house settled into an early night. But the calm of early May never lasted long. The following days were filled with the ordinary work of the house and farm. Washing and ironing filled the kitchen for much of one morning, while a bitter wind blew outside, cold enough to make the whole day feel more like March than May. After tea, I went for a walk with Joan and the dogs, the two of us enjoying the fresh air despite the cold wind. Trips into town were still necessary now and again. One morning, John and I went into Eastleigh to collect a new tennis racket for him. Mother kindly looked after Heather while I went off dancing at the St. Boniface Hall later that day. Meanwhile, John called in to see Tommy Parker, who was in bed with and not very well at all. I believe the talk was all about football and the Saints, and I went opposite to Oak Cottage and stopped by to see Mrs. St. John and talk about children's schooling and their futures. Village life carried on with its usual rhythm of visits and errands. One afternoon I went to see young Malcolm West, who just returned home after having his tonsils removed. It seems that half the children in the district were having their tonsils out this year. The house itself was in some disarray for a while as painters arrived and began work, leaving everything rather upside down. There's plenty happening on the farm too. Tommy Parker's pullets were sold, and Joan and Les came up with Cross to help move them out. Not long afterwards, Joan and I made a small journey to take Roger back to school, and on the way home we stopped at Betty's house for tea. Later that same day, we went to collect a batch of young chicks from Mr. Chalk. The poultry yard is growing noisier by the week. Visitors continued to come and go. Mr. Cross appeared most mornings for one reason or another, and Nora and her family called in during the afternoons. There was always someone passing through the farmhouse kitchen. George Baisley was recovering from his tonsil operation, and neighbours came asking after him. Joan, Tommy, and Lorna called by one evening looking for a bantam cock, which we gave them. Even on quieter days, there was rarely a moment without some small task to be done. John found time to play tennis at the Chalks on Kingsway, while I spent a day nursing a dreadful cold that left me feeling thoroughly miserable. Gradually, I began to feel better, and once recovered, I planted marigolds in the garden and finished ironing before lunch. Later, I went round to see Mother, and in the evening, Joan and Les called again, with Mr. Cross staying on for supper. The garden continued to demand attention. John built a rustic fence along the front of the garden, which improved the look immensely, and I finished digging the bed where the gladioli were to be planted. The weather, however, remained stubbornly dry. Day after day passed with warm sunshine but no rain, and the ground was beginning to need it badly. One afternoon I went up to the schools to teach the young princesses their dance, while John played tennis at Chalks. The following evening brought a little excitement. After leaving the children with Mother and Bella, I went with the Deans to the dance at the Polygon. It turned out to be a very good evening, and the next day the house filled with visitors once again. Veronica and Judith came for the day, and there seemed to be callers arriving all afternoon. John went to his lodge meeting in Hursley, while I walked round to the Beatons for supper. Then the weather changed. One morning the rain began to fall. Real, steady rain after weeks of dry weather. It seemed to do the land a great deal of good, though everyone agreed we could still do with some more. That evening, the Beatons and the Parkers came round for supper, and there was much talk of the rain and what it might mean for the crops. The following day remained damp, but the garden work continued. I planted gladioli and chrysanthemums in the front beds. Later that day, we all went together, the Beatons, the Parkers, and ourselves, to watch the lovely Easter parade in Eastleigh. Afterwards, we finished the evening with supper at the Parkers' house. The hall was busy again as well. I spent time preparing the dancers for a display, while John visited Mr. and Mrs. Tanner. A lot of my evenings were often spent mending clothes. The darning basket never seemed to stay empty for long. But the greatest excitement of the month came quite unexpectedly. One day, John and I returned home, as we had been out and bought a horse for Jennifer, a lovely pony called Smoky. Jennifer, of course, was thrilled, and I secretly hoped that I might ride him myself from time to time. Smoky soon became the centre of attention around the house. Before long, we were making trips to buy the things we needed. A visit to Winchester produced a saddle for him, and Jennifer later took him to the blacksmith in Hursley for Mr. Eads to have his shoes fitted. That's on the horse, not Mr. Eads. He seemed a good-natured pony, and everyone quickly grew fond of him. Life around the house continued with its mixtures of chores and small pleasures. I went into Eastleigh one morning and bought white shoes for the girls, and even treated myself to a pair of tennis shoes. Then on another day, Joan and I went into Southampton, as John was at the cricket that was being played at Norton's Road, and I bought myself another pair of white shoes. Meanwhile, we collected more day-old chicks when they arrived at the Chalmers-Ford railway station, and were quickly put under the heaters in the carriage, adding to the already noisy poultry yard. Mr. Cross helped me plant out sweet peas in the garden after digging a big trench. And then at long last one evening I finally finished the mountain of darning that had been waiting for weeks. Though of course I knew it would start again the very next day. There were moments of leisure too. One Sunday afternoon I played 3 sets of tenors at the Parkers' house and thoroughly enjoyed it. Another evening was spent at the Beatons with supper and plenty of conversation. Days often began early, with large washes hanging on the line from the granary to the boiler house, followed by hours of ironing. Jennifer was doing a lot of riding with Janet, joining her as well on Smoky, and the garden continued to grow as the days warmed. I mowed the front lawn again, as the grass seemed determined to grow faster each week. Walks round to Beechcroft in Lakewood Road were frequent, often stopping at Joan's house in Pine Road on the way. One day I even successfully managed to ride on Smoky myself, which was great fun. There was more sewing again as well, this time making new check suits for the girls. Rain returned occasionally towards the end of the month, and one afternoon I walked all the way to the school in the rain and got soaking wet. Trips into Eastleigh were still necessary too, where I found more pinafore frocks for the girls. Mother and Bella came for tea quite often, and then babysit in the evening, when we all went to the cinema with the Beatons and the Parkers to see Mr. Blandings Builds His Dreams House with Cary Grant, Myrna Loy and Melvyn Douglas, and The Window, which was a huge box office hit starring Barbara Hale and Bobby Driscoll. They were both really, really good films. Afterwards, everyone returned to our house for eggs and bacon before heading home. The final Sunday of the month began with pouring rain, but cleared beautifully after dinner. The usual callers arrived through the afternoon. We prepared a bed for Lassie in the shed, knowing she would soon be having her puppies, and later Joan came by, and we took a walk with the dogs down the Gallop to the Camel's Hump and back through Ram Alley. In the evening, John went off to play tennis again at the Chalks, while we listened to the music from Oklahoma on the wireless. The final days of May passed in their usual lively fashion. Mr. Cross came to lunch, and afterwards I rode Smoky again before going to the Parkers for a game of tennis. That evening, the Parkers, the Beatons, and Simon Hasgold all arrived for supper, turning the house into another cheerful gathering. And then, as the last day of the month arrived, the weather turned showery again, but the washing managed to dry despite the rain. John went to Hursley to deliver some chicks to Kath Cooper, and later we drove up to the village and then back to Beechcroft to see Mother and Bella. There was dancing again in the afternoon at St Boniface Hall, and the class seems to be growing and everyone really seems to enjoy it. And so May came to its close, a month of growing gardens, busy fields, a new pony in the yard, and the promise of new life once again in the farmyard. But the real excitement came later that evening on the 31st. Lassie began having her puppies. June 1949. Hayfields and summer days. June arrived with the farm already alive with activity. First day of the month brought excitement in the shed behind the house, where Lassie had finally had her puppies. 7 in all, 4 of them little bitches, wiggling and squeaking together in the straw. It was always a small miracle to see new life arrive on the farm. That same day, John and I went to Southampton, returning with a new mattress for Andrew and a rug for his bedroom. It just felt good to bring new things into the house after the long winter months. Later, I cycled over to the Parkers with Andrew and ordered some material for new frocks for the girls. But farm life has its darker moments as well. One morning, we discovered that a rat had killed 37 of our young chicks. It was a dreadful loss and a reminder that life on a farm can be harsh as well as joyful. Still, life moved on quickly. Rain fell steadily one day, keeping everyone indoors. I spent the afternoon making dresses, while the weather drummed against the windows. Visitors came and went as usual. The Parkers arrived and were able to take Mother and Bella home for us. Mr. Cross called in, and a new mattress and rug were delivered, making Andrew's room look very smart indeed. Soon afterwards, there was a small farewell gathering at Joan and Les's house before they left for their holiday. The evening rang rather late, with laughter and conversation before everyone finally drifted home. The next morning dawned fine and bright. The Beatons had begun their holiday, leaving the neighbourhood feeling slightly quieter for a while, and I spent most of the day working on blouses for the girls, determined to get them finished as soon as I possibly could. Even the bank holiday on Monday 6th of June passed quietly, but as usual, washing and ironing filled much of the day, along with a trip to the market and cutting of the front lawn. Later, John and I drove over to Flexford together to check on the hay to see when it might be ready to cut. Trips into the village at Chalmersford were frequent. One afternoon, John and I called at Beechcroft before I went dancing at the Ritchie Hall again. Later, we had dinner at the Parkers' house, and I bought 2 pairs of nylons from Lorna Parker, quite a luxury these days. The next day brought preparation for Janet's birthday. I made her cake and later walked round to Beechcroft, where Nora and George were visiting as well. In the evening, there was tennis at the Parkers, which was very pleasant. One particularly busy day followed. Mrs. Fulbrook had begun her holiday, which meant even more work in the house for me. I spent the entire afternoon and evening baking, preparing for Janet's birthday, and that was a great party on the 11th. That morning, John cut 10 acres of hay at Flexford, the first great sign that summer work had truly begun on the farm. Meanwhile, the kitchen was full of activity as I hurried to make sandwiches for the party, and by 3:30 the children had arrived. Mother and Bella came round to help, though Nora couldn't come because George wasn't very well, and he missed the party, though. It was a great success. There were strawberries and ice cream, which felt like the very taste of summer. Later that evening, John went off to play tennis while I sat listening to a play on the wireless and doing some more dining. The following days passed in that familiar rhythm of farm life. Laundry hung on the lines in the garden, hay was cut across the fields, and the house filled again with visitors and errands. Jennifer went to Hayling Island with the Deans for the day by the sea. The weather turned hot, very hot, though sometimes the sky remained dull and threatening rain. One afternoon a cow fell ill with milk fever, and we had to call the vet to give an injection. It was a worrying moment, though fortunately she recovered and was up and about again soon. Meanwhile, haymaking continued. 6 more acres were cut one day, and the fields at Flexford were busy with men gathering the drying grass. But June also brought a disappointment. Jennifer learned that she'd failed her scholarship examination. It was a hard moment for her and for all of us, but there was little time to dwell on it as her music examinations were taking place the very same day. Life carried on. John continued with the hay harvest while I mowed the lawn, and again and again and again as it grew faster than ever. One day I visited Mrs. St. John's to discuss possible schools for the children. We hoped to try to get them into a school in Southampton, this convent school. Soon afterwards, I took the girls for interviews at the convent, combining a trip with some shopping in town. I bought cotton material for summer frocks and even a length for an evening dress. Back home, I spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen and tidying up the sweet peas in the garden. The weather remained beautiful. Another hayfield, the Hillfield, was cut, and I even sat there in the sunshine watching the mower making the rows, while making buttonholes on the girls' blouses, and John cleared the nettles from the edge of the garden. Visitors appeared constantly. Nora and Stanley called in, Doug stopped by, Mr. Cross came as well, and we heard that young Malcolm West now had measles. He always seems to be ill, that boy. That evening we listened to the wireless play The Lady Vanishes, and that was quite good. Gradually the girls' blouses were finished at last, and I began cutting out a new frock for Jennifer. Though the days are warm, a cold wind occasionally swept across the fields, but it did make the hay dry quickly. Tennis at the Parkers remained a favourite evening activity, and the following week brought half-term holidays for the children. John continued working in the hay fields while I dug up the legumes in the garden. I even took a few photographs of Lassie's puppies, which were growing fast. Joan and Les returned from their holiday and soon appeared at the house for a cup of tea to tell us all about it. School matters occupied several days. I took Andrew to St. Mary's College in Southampton for an interview, calling in at Beechcroft to see Mother and Joan on the way home. The dentist, Eric Inge, saw the whole family one afternoon, which was never anybody's favourite outing. But the month also brought one very enjoyable day. Norman and Catherine Cooper took us to the Reading show, where the weather was blazing hot. It was a wonderful day out, made even better when Norman won first, second and fourth prizes for his wonderful jerseys. Back at home, the heat continued. One afternoon, Joan and Les came round along with Tommy and Lorna for eggs and bacon, and Joan bought raspberries and ice cream. Another day, I simply sat on the garden bench all afternoon, finishing the endless pile of dining. Nora arrived with her family and even bought George's old cot for Heather, which was kind of her. Life continued in that pleasant mixture of work and leisure. John played tennis frequently at the Chalks, while I worked steadily on Jennifer's new check dress. The heat lingered through the final days of the month. John and I made a morning trip to Winchester and later sat in the garden sewing. Evenings often ended with quiet walks along the lane with Joan and Les. Gradually the ironing that seemed never-ending was finally finished. Jennifer's dress slowly took shape stitch by stitch, and the very last day of June I rose early and completed it at last. Joan later called in and I walked with her while John went once again to play tennis at the Chalks. And so June slipped gently into summer, a month of hayfields, hot days, growing puppies, birthday parties, and long evenings shared with neighbours, as life on the farm rolls steadily onwards beneath the warm June sun. So coming up next Sunday, in episode 11 of My Mother's Diaries, I'll tell you about July 1949. And that brings the full heights of summer to the farm. Scorching hot days in the fields as peas are picked and haymaking continues and harvest starts. But that's for next week. Thank you for listening to My Mother's Diaries.